Oh my god, Devastation is actually fucking amazing. That is the new Evoker DPS spec that you will be able to play in Dragonflight once it launches, or maybe you have beta access. But until then, let's actually talk a little bit about Devastation and what it is all about. And also, let's not forget that we are actually covering pretty much everything there is to cover in Alpha regarding all the classes and specs and the content and more to come. So please, if you like the video, click the like button, hit the subscribe, enable those notifications so you can have access to all of the content that we will do regarding everything related to Dragonflight. Now, with that out of the way, let's actually talk a little bit about Evoker, the Devastation spec. Now, if you haven't heard yet, there's a new race in Dragonflight called the Dracthyr, and they can only have one class, which is the Evoker, and that class Evoker can only be played by the Dracthyr race. You can obviously be both Horde and Alliance, kind of like Pandaren, but that's about it. The Evoker has two specs: Preservation, which is the healing spec that you probably seen in a video that we posted about 2 days ago, and Devastation is the DPS spec. Now, the DPS spec has the new talent tree system, of course, like every other class, and the general talent tree system is riddled with utility and actually some healing abilities that can make you into an interesting hybrid DPS spec. Now, there's a bunch of utility there that's like really whack. You have massive AoE roots with landslide. You have oppression roar that can just make everybody take way more CC during it, and you also have a stun on one of the coolest abilities that have ever graced the game, which is Deep Breath, which you've seen in the reveal, and you've seen it everywhere, and you've expected a dragon to do this. You take flight and you soar into the direction and just blast the entire direction with like massive fire damage. It is pretty fucking cool, and that can also stun. And obviously there's a bunch more to talk about the talents, which we're not going to go into because that just can take hours and hours and hours, since the talent tree is probably also subject to change like most of what we have so far on Alpha. Moving into the Devastation talent tree, I do want to mention that there's like two main types of playstyles, since you do have two main types of spells in terms of damage. You of course have the healing spells that you have a baseline one, and you can get more by actually speccing into the general tree, which that's pretty much up to you if you want to have any form of hybridiness and, you know, maybe some utility to your group. But if we're gonna be talking strictly, purely DPS vibes, you have two main schools of damage. You have red and you have blue, and you can think of red as fire, but it's like Spell Fire and Spell Frost, right? Blue being the Frost version. And I think, although it hasn't yet been confirmed, but it's most likely that Spell Fire and Spell Frost are basically Arcane and Fire and Arcane and Frost damage, just like we have, you know, Shadow Flame for Warlocks and things like that. Now, there are two, you can obviously build essentially the talents in any way that you want, but you can go in a specific, more concentrated path. And the blue side of things is actually the one that's a little bit more fun in the game right now, and it kind of gives you massive burst, a little bit more single target focused, and some interesting mechanics that we will go into a little bit as well, while the fire side is kind of more oriented towards AoE, towards dots, towards some interesting combos and cooldown reduction. Now, the main combat mechanic of Devastation, regardless of what talent tree path you pick, is the Essence Burst mechanic, which is basically the second row of the talents that enables this mechanic after you pick your first spell, which is Pyre. Pyre being a fire spell that blobs a ball of flame and it deals some AoE damage in a small target area with a little bit of a delay, because it has like that little travel time, little alley-oop type thing, which is actually kind of cool. It's a new type of mechanic that we have seen in Alpha, and we're probably gonna see more and more in the future. Now, the Essence Burst mechanic ties closely into your resource. Of course, you have mana, but you also have essences. Essences, think of essences kind of like Death Knight runes, to say the least. They generate passively once you consume them, and you consume them on supposedly powerful spells, and we will get to that as well. There are talents that can increase the generation or regeneration rather of the essences, although outside of those talents we haven't seen anything so far that can influence the regeneration of the essences, but that can probably change, although I highly doubt it, since there's at least 2 talents that speed up essence regeneration. If we're gonna have something like haste or anything like that that can speed it up, then those talents kind of lose value, so I guess we'll see. But going into the essence burst mechanic, what that means is you have a couple of baseline spells. You obviously have the Living Flame, which is baseline for both specs for Evoker, which is basically a little fireball type spell that can also be casted on an ally to heal them for actually quite a bit. Now, we're gonna leave numbers aside. The actual numbers don't really matter in the sense that obviously everything is gonna be tuned, and likely prepare yourself that Evoker as a class will probably be a little bit overpowered at launch, since Blizzard does want people to play it as much as possible to get feedback and get it in tune with the meta and so on and so forth, because you need that, you know, that hook to grab people in. Now, what the Essence Burst does is once you use your basic abilities, Living Flame being one of them, and Azure Strike being the blue version of the spell that does a little bit of cleave damage that's instant, you can have a percent chance, I think it's 20% for Living Flame and 15% for Azure Strike, to proc Essence Burst, making your next ability that consumes Essence not consume Essence. So think about it as clear casting from Arcane Mage. Now, this is kind of cool because the Essence spending abilities are kind of powerful in their specific situations, and they are pretty expensive. I think baseline they cost 3 essence each, and you start with 5 essences. And having them reduced and being free obviously can make a more explosive part of your rotation happen and be a little bit more exciting. Now, there are talents that can raise your essences to all the way to 6, and there are talents, I think 1 at least, that reduces the essence cost of Pyre to 2 instead of 3, and you can essentially just lob those balls of flames consistently, at least in big AoE fights, which we haven't been able to test in dungeons or content like that, since the only thing that's available right now is purely questing in the Azure Span zone. Now, the other essence spender that you have outside of the Pyre, which is the first one that you unlock, is Disintegrate, and with this we can go into the blue talent tree and talk a little bit about the playstyle, which is fucking amazing. Disintegrate is basically Ray of Frost. Is you channel for, I guess it's hasted, 2 to 3 seconds, and you deal damage each tick as you channel it. It consumes 3 essence and it deals really good damage. There are talents that can buff it to deal more damage. There are talents that can buff it to proc certain spells during the channel. It does massive AoE damage, and if you go further into the blue tree, you unlock stuff like Eternity Surge, which is one of the abilities that plays into the charge system that you've seen and you might have heard of before. What this does essentially is it does a bit of damage. It actually does a lot of damage, to be fair, and if you charge it for each level of the charge state that you hold it in, because you hold the spell down and it charges, you hit extra targets with it. So it can essentially turn into an AoE. With enough talents, you can double the amount of targets that it hits, and it can go all the way up to 8 total targets, which is pretty nutty, considering that that's kind of the upper average of target count that you would have in a Mythic Plus environment, although this might change in Dragonflight, but in Shadowlands theme, 8 targets is usually as high as you would go in a big pool, although sometimes you can go higher, but that's usually like MDI high keys and so on and so forth. So 8 is kind of okay-ish. Now you can go further down to another spell called Charge Bolt, which is, alright, well, Eternity Surge has a 30-second cooldown and has a cast time, because obviously you have to charge it, right, if you want to hit more. Charge Bolt is, or Charge Blast is instant, it has 15-second cooldown, and there's another talent that you will want to pick if you ever pick this talent that makes Azure Strike your kind of filler, although not a really generator spell, buff its damage by 100% per stack. Now, I'm not sure if this works as intended, because the buffed up damage makes it fucking one-shot mobs. It is crazy how much damage it can do, and if it crits, it basically kills a target, a level gnome based on your level. Now, of course, this damage is, you know, subjective. Obviously, it's going to be tuned, but we can expect it to be like a big burst ability. It's on a cooldown, right? So you cannot really spam it, but that's what it is, and obviously it's amazing, man. It's amazing. And of course, I mentioned the talent earlier that says Disintegrate can cast a spell. That's basically Eternity Surge. So as you channel Disintegrate, you can cast a level 1 Eternity Surge. And by level 1, essentially what that means is the level 1 version of the charge, right? Because the damage is the same, but the charge just adds more targets. But this will probably be just single target. And if you have a specific talent that doubles the targets that it hits, it can hit 2 targets. So the cleave potential of blue is fucking fantastic. I expect blue to be more of the raid vibe that you would like to go. So if you want to go raid and you want to hit the boss, or maybe a 1 or 2 ads that the boss encounters might have, you'll probably build your dragon, your evoker, your devastation towards a more blue focused playstyle. Now we go into the red style of the play, and you also have a baseline spell that I haven't mentioned before that's actually available to the preservation as well, and that is Flame Breath, which is probably the most iconic dragon spell that you will have, and you essentially breathe fire in a cone. Now the cone is kind of narrow, but it's really long. It hits really far away. And it does, similar to Eternity Surge, it does initial damage, which remains the same, but if you charge it, for every charge that you do, it also applies a strong dot on the targets, and each additional charge makes the dot last longer. So far, the way the damage is tuned is that the dot that you leave on your targets is pretty much the same no matter how long you charge it. It's just that the longer you charge it, the longer the dot lasts, so the less time you will have to worry about, you know, having everything dotted. So it kind of depends on the encounter and how long things will last, because the skill itself has a 30-second cooldown and the dot at max charge lasts for 16 seconds. Now there are talents that can reduce the cooldown of Flame Breath down in the fiery red part of the talent tree, so there's a little bit of a play over how long you charge it for, how long you want that dot to last, because you'll be reducing the cooldown as you play, and the cooldown is basically reduced by skills like Pyre. So essentially it's a big juggle of essences that you will consume on Pyre, cooldown reduction that you will offer Flame Breath to the dot uptime. So there's some complicated, not really, but there's some intricacies in the red playstyle that are not particularly present in the blue. You do also have a spell in the red, only one so far, that's called Firestorm, and this is where damage might be a little bit more important to talk about, because Firestorm is basically a casted flame strike-like ability. You cast a big AoE on a target. It's actually like Blizzard, because you put a big circle down and that circle is blasted by fire waves every few seconds, or depending on how much haste you have, and it does damage. Now the damage it does right now is very small. The one thing is that it's not target capped, at least it doesn't seem like in the tooltip. It doesn't have any target cap indications, so it can potentially hit for like a lot if you fight a lot of mobs. But baseline, the damage is okay. So just to put it into perspective, it does about 4 to 5k damage as you are geared in the alpha at level 65, and Pyre, which is the first ability that you unlock in the talent tree, which consumes essence, does about the same. It does about 3.5k damage, and that's also AoE, but in a small group. So the damage is a little bit lackluster, considering stuff in the blue side do like anything from 10 to 30k, which is super nutty. I don't think any other spec that's currently available on the alpha can deal the numbers that these will basically show on your screen, but again, like I said, numbers are subject to change. There are a couple of cooler talents down the road that can reduce cooldowns and increase dot uptime on targets, and it's pretty cool. I'm not gonna go into all of them because likely some of them will change. It feels like the blue side is a little bit stronger than the red, so likely there probably are going to be some balances in. What is important though is that in the middle of the talent tree is Dragon Rage, which is a DPS cooldown. It's just so far kind of your only DPS cooldown. If you really think about it, Deep Breath is the one that you charge through. It's like the Froststorm's Fury from Frost Decay, but you're the one that charges through and deals damage. That's baseline for all specs. But Dragon Rage is only available to Devastation, and what Dragon Rage does, because we talked about Essence Burst before, is that it makes the Essence Burst proc chance to be 100%. Baseline Essence Burst has a 15% chance to proc from Azure Strike and 20% from Living Flame. But obviously once you press Dragon Rage, that goes up to 100%. And additionally, if ideally you're in combat, when you press Dragon Rage, you throw 3 pyres out at enemies, which is big AoE damage, it's massive blasty, it's really good, kind of reminiscent of the Demon Hunter's metamorphosis. You just do a massive amount of AoE damage, and then you just start, you know, casting instant spells, consume essences, and all that good stuff. Now we go into the animation, and I think Dragon Rage is a good example of starting to talk about the animation. It's actually a not impressively visual ability. It's probably one of the only abilities that are not impressive visually at all. You just glow. It's a nice glow. It's a glow though. You have Dragon Rage. You would expect something draconic, something explosive, but it's not really, right? So I don't know if this is going to change. Right now it's not really impressive, but we can talk about pretty much everything else. Living Flames animation is kind of basic. It's just little sparkles of red, and Azure Strike is kind of the same. Not that important. Pyre that we talked about, you basically lob a ball of flame, and that's pretty cool. And pretty much all of the animations are some dark lightning type red, while the blues one are like some frost arcane vibe type stuff. And the animations are actually really cool. Firestorm has a neat little display of fireworks, which is really cool. And definitely overall into the red side of the spells, they seem more oriented towards fire lightning type feels into their color palette and the way that the animations develop on your screen. So not as fiery as Fire Mage like you would expect, which is, I guess it's okay because you don't want to, you know, clash with the identity of Fire Mage, and you both have like super strong fiery spells. And blue as well, you don't really want them to be like frosty or arcane, so it's kind of a combination between the two. And that's kind of it. The animations are amazing. It's probably better if you just see them for yourself, and obviously you're seeing them on the screen right now, but once you get to play with them, you'll see exactly what I mean. And that's pretty much everything that we have on Devastation. It's a really fun and engaging spec. I personally was surprised at how much fun I had, because from the looks of it and the reveal, Dracthyr as a whole, as a class, no matter what the spec, didn't really appeal to me. It's fine. It's fun. I'm not 100% sure if it's a spec I would consider maining. I can definitely see myself having a lot of fun with this as an alt. It still feels a little bit on the lackluster side, similar to how Demon Hunter was when it released. It does have a little bit more, but it's clear if you look at Devastation, then you look at something like Assassination, the amount of interaction Assassination has from its talents and its build that affects spells and poisons and all that kind of stuff, it's maybe around double that Devastation has. And Devastation also has fewer spells and buttons to press. However, in terms of the actual damage rotation, although Devastation might not have amazing amount of numbers and interactions with spells, you do have a buttload of utility. You simply have two racials. One is like a Typhoon type ability, and the other one is just a knock-up ability. Then you also have the kind of baseline ability that you start with, which is Landslide, that roots everything in place. You can talent into a big AoE stun from Deep Breath. You can talent into more root uptime from Landslide. You can talent into an ability that's probably going to be mandatory in Mythic Plus scenarios, that you roar at your enemies and they take extra CC duration from, obviously, your abilities and most likely your party's abilities as well, which is fucking crazy. You obviously have healing abilities, you have saving abilities, dispels, interrupts, and all of that stuff, which actually makes it a very interesting spec and class as a whole. Very different than what we know so far. We haven't had so much utility baked into a spec in a long time, and I cannot think for the life of me of one spec that is in the game that has this much utility. And by utility, I mean obviously CC, dispels, and combat assistance to your parties, heals, and all of that good stuff. It's pretty fucking cool. So at the very least, I don't know if it's a main worthy spec. Obviously, it's gonna be a little bit overpowered, although I do see myself having a lot of fun with it. It's maybe a cup of tea for some people, maybe not, but what I can guarantee you is that you will have a lot of fun if you decide to play the Evoker, any spec whatsoever. So, thank you for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. We're gonna have a lot more coverage on Dragonflight content on this channel. So again, make sure to, you know, enable those notifications after you click that subscribe, after you click that like button, because it does help the video out and does help the channel grow, so we can bring you guys more stuff. And of course, thank you to the patrons who are supporting our channel time and time again and giving us their hard-earned casherinos to make awesome content for you guys. You are saviors of this channel, and we really appreciate you guys, because without your assistance, it would be very hard to do what we do. So thank you. And dear viewer, if you're interested in becoming a patron and see what this is all about, all the tiers and all that good stuff. You can check the link down below in the description and treat yourself to some tier rewards from our Patreon, wallpapers and such of the like. Thank you for watching the video. See you next time.